Hey guys, we are back on Unorthodox Thoughts. My name is Tiffany Tate, and this is my partner, Dr. Lillian Rodriguez.
Hey everyone.
We represent the Unorthodox group. We are essentially going through week by week our totally unorthodox devotional planner. This is our 12-month planner broken down with an adult coloring book. We highlight the 12 boss women in the Bible that we are learning leadership skills from. And we really grow through a weekly devotional and growth workbook. So this month we are focusing on God's expectations and the story of Esther, Queen Esther at that. We're really focusing on what were her gifts and how did she use her gifts for God's kingdom. So where are we at, Dr. Lily, with finding out what our gifts are?
Exactly. So, we're going to break this down week by week. And last week when we talked about Esther, we learned that, she had a gift. And we discussed the theme or the idea that everyone has a gift. And so we're going to be looking a little bit more, exploring what the Bible has to say about your gifts, our gifts, and sort of dig deeper on that topic. And sort of Tiffany and I can talk a little bit more about sort of our own experiences with finding our gifts. So what are my gifts? The Bible verse that we're going to be looking at is Romans 12:6-8. And it goes, God's marvelous grace imparts to each one of us varying gifts and ministries that are uniquely ours. So if God has given you the grace gift of prophecy, you must activate the gift by using the proportion of faith you have to prophesy. If your grace gift is serving, then thrive in serving others well. If you have the grace gift of teaching, then be actively teaching and training others. If you have the grace gift of encouragement, then use it often to encourage others. If you have the grace gift of giving to meet the needs of others, then may you prosper in your generosity without any fanfare. If you have the gift of leadership, be passionate about your leadership. And if you have the gift of showing compassion, then flourish in your cheerful display of compassion. So what we gather here from this verse is that, or these verses, is that God, we get grace gifts, and that can look like an array of things. That can be leadership, that can be serving others, teaching, giving to others. And so these are very umbrella, big picture, overarching gifts that we're talking about, or that the Bible talks about. And that can manifest in a variety of ways. So for example, God has blessed me with the ability, to go to school and become a psychologist and work intimately with people. And so God has developed that leadership quality in me to serve his kingdom, and to speak to other women, to write this book along with Tiffany. And so that gift, that because a lot of people are psychologists, a lot of people are go to graduate school. A lot of people have careers, but that doesn't always manifest into a God's purpose, right? And so what we're seeing is that you can have an array of gifts or things about yourself. It might not be an education, it might be something else, like we mentioned last week, but that God has purpose with that gift, and that can be used to bless others in an array of ways and fashions. And it's really up to us to be, obedient and explore that and train that gift in order to learn how to apply it. And so some of our thoughts or reflections about, this is that we are all provided with grace gifts, like I mentioned, things that come innate to us and that we are just naturally good at. We call them, we talk about talents, right? Or having, random talents. These gifts come from God. And identifying what they are, how we can develop them, and how we can serve others with our God-given talents is part of God's expectations for us. God can give us any gift he desires. As unorthodox or as it may seem or strange, it serves a purpose. And so what that's really saying is that we have to look at ourselves whole, right? And look at ourselves we might not have finances, we might not have a partner, we might not have children, we might not have a career, but there's still something inside of you that God has given you that you can use to serve others, that you can use to explore. And this is a process. This is a time-consuming process. It's an uncomfortable process, but it's something that is possible. And if you are looking to really tap into God's glory and really tap into what God has for you in your life, try it, check it out. Because there's one thing that I know. I have lived out of God's will, and I have lived in God's will. And I don't ever want to go back to living out of God's will. That is, I'm not saying that there isn't any uncomfortability or pain in living God's will, because that's part of life. But there is such a difference in how you handle it, how it impacts you, how you manage it. When you're out of God's will and you're not doing what you're in your purpose with, I was a miserable human being. I'm sure that we can have a lot of witnesses of how nasty I was. And I times I didn't even like myself, honestly, because things didn't go together. I was forcing things, I was pushing things. And I can say that when I stepped into God's purpose, there is a peace that's unsurmountable. There is an unexplainable joy. And that does not mean that I don't have difficulties, challenges, tribulations, and trials. I have all of those, like everyone else. But the way that I am able to handle them and the way that God allows me to handle them is in such a different way that I don't think there are words to explain. I don't know, Tiffany, do you have any words?
So I think that for me, it made sense I think for us, we rose the corporate ladder, right? That was kind of our trajectory. We became entrepreneurs and we grew our entrepreneurial businesses, but we were directors and executives first within healthcare. And what people called skills, for a long time, I thought I was so skilled and I thought I had this expertise and I thought I had all this knowledge. And don't get me wrong, I did. Right. And we were paid well for that skill and that expertise. The problem was I thought I had skill and I thought I had expertise. And I didn't realize what it was God's gift that he bestowed, that he could give and he could take away. Right. And that he can bless or he can dry up. And so it was learning for me what my natural gifts were. I'm naturally organized. I'm naturally a leader. I'm naturally outspoken. And these were skills that made me money and made me a CEO and made me successful in business that really were detrimental to me as growing as a wife, as a mother, and as a leader in God's kingdom. And so adjusting what were skills into a gift were a purpose, it was a process rather for me. And so like we talk about how we kind of go through these in 5 minutes and, the brief devotions that we do. But the truth is, you will witness, and I'm sure people are going to watch this and y'all can record, y'all can go ahead and comment. Y'all could talk all the trash you want, all the staff we've had for years. Our staff have warned us that they're going to get out here and talk trash. We're ready. We understand that we failed in a lot of ways. Part of the problem is, right, when you're relying on God, sometimes he gives you pieces to the puzzle. Lily has a really good gift of discernment, right? And wisdom in that way. Whereas God may sometimes show me a vision that gives me an end story. However, with my own human mess making ability, I tend to try to figure out my own path to that end resolve. And without Lily's discernment and real faith, we would have gotten down a lot more rabbit holes along the way. So really learning how to channel that skill into a gift was a process for me. And I continue to try to remind myself that it is not natural to me. And I have to put it back on the altar and figure out, God, if you've given me this, how do I use it for your kingdom? So, this week's goal was, what are some of the 3 characteristics that we see in ourselves that we consider to be natural gifts? And if that's the case, and this is what God has given us, how do we use those for good and not evil, right? Or how do we use those for the goals in our life and for God's kingdom? So what are some of your natural gifts, Dr. Lily, and how are we going to use it this year to get to our goals?
So some of my natural gifts are, I would say that I'm sort of like a back end player, right? And that looks like it's negative, right? That looks like I don't engage with other people, or that I don't think that I'm like that it might be interpreted as people thinking that I feel like I'm too good for them. I kind of like, I'm sort of like I'm closed off at times, and not that that's a good thing, right? But how God has transformed that was meant to be for my detriment, is that God has allowed me like to spend time with him more, because I'm very good with my boundaries. God has allowed me to really work on myself, because I can focus on me and sort of shut off the other things outside of me. God has grown that into patience for other people. And I really, that's also extended to sort of being compassionate for people. And so I feel that even as a psychologist, sort of the work that I was doing before I had this understanding of myself to after I had this understanding is very different. I feel like I can be more purposeful with my clients. I can be more connected. I can be more understanding, more empathetic. I was trained to do all those things. But when I walked into my gift and I understood that sort of taking me time and being sort of in the background of things really allowed me to think and conceptualize things, made me a more purposeful clinician. It made me a more intentional wife. It made me a more purposeful mother about how I move about things. And that before that was just like, okay, she's not engaging, she's disconnected, she doesn't want to speak up, she's shy, she has an attitude, which all of it might be a little true. I'm not here.
All of which is true.
But I found purpose in that. And I give that to God every single day, because that could be my fault too, right? If I don't present that to God, because I don't have the power, the ability to change that. My humanity limits me. And so that's kind of where I've seen God really change and really use my gifts. And I hope I didn't run off topic here.
No, I feel like you could have easily have fought that every step of the way, right? And life could have been hard for us. For those who can't see that yet, they will see over the course of the next few weeks that we are literally polar opposites. We are night and day in so many ways. And people ask Lily and I all the time. We've had a million business partners along the way on different ventures, and it's never worked, right? Thank God for each other. But people ask us, how are we able to stay together so long and have such successful business ventures together? And we know wholly it's not us, it's God. And that's because we don't disagree. Every time we have a difference of opinion, it's simply let's go and let God have it. It could be difficult for somebody like a Lily to say, I am in the background and I am quiet and I'm letting Tiffany, show her face to the whole world, because oftentimes people see my face first, right? It could also be exhausting for the Tiffany to say, always see my face. And if you don't understand me and Lily's dynamic, it could look like Tiffany works harder than Lily, right? Or that Tiffany is the one taking the brunt of it. And that's surely not the case. We just simply have different roles, and we've always respected each other's roles and responsibilities. And at times those have shifted, and we've been forced to shift with that. But you could fight against it. And it's funny, we talked about in the verse, it said in Romans that we need to, if we have this particular gift, we need to behave in this particular way. And if we have the gift of serving and giving, then we need to show up in that gift and in that strength. And if we have the gift of leading, we have to show up in that gift and that strength. But what happens when your gift of leadership is completely tied to your gift of humility, right? Sometimes it is so hard to show up as that leader. And I think that, I know everybody will come on here and talk trash to us in a minute. You have surely knocked that out the ballpark well before I had a clue, right? Like, you had to totally eat humility as I was stunting like my daddy, right? Like,
so just to elaborate a little story about our collaboration and friendship, we actually met 10 years ago. I don't even remember at this point.
Yeah, at this point about 10 years.
And so Tiffany interviewed me for a position, and she, I got the job for a story that we'll talk about another day. But the funds for that program ended up wrapping up or finishing, and so we were left without jobs, and I was being supervised by our lovely Dr. Bliss.
Shout out to Dr. Bliss.
And she has served a purpose in my life too. I don't know if she knows it or not, but we can talk about that too. And so I got a job quickly, even before the place shut down. I had a job because Dr. Bliss kind of pulled me over. And so here I am, I want you to see sort of the limits of the human mind, right? Here I am, I have technically, right, by the world standards, more credentials than Tiffany, because I have the doctorate degree and she has a master's. So I'm more trained. I had been working at this new place for maybe 3 months now. So I had history there.
You were a published author, a research clinician.
Yes. I had a relationship with Dr. Bliss, who was the clinical director and part of the decision makers in the organization. And a position comes up for the associate clinical director. And so I applied, and I was qualified, right, to do it. But I hadn't had my license and set in place. And so they declined me. And I remember sitting in my car, driving home, crying because Tiffany had been my boss, right? I was making like crappy money. And I remember sitting in my car and boohoo crying home because God had spoken to me and told me that I needed to call Tiffany and refer her for that position that I had been denied. And I was like, God, like I deserve this. I should be the one getting, I've worked for this. Like she's already been a director. Like she, you know, I'm more qualified than her. Like craziness spitting out of my mouth. But in that moment, I had to choose obedience. God said, call her. And I didn't even like her that much, to be honest with you.
I was gonna say, you skipping a whole part of the story. We ain't like each other.
Well, we don't want to talk about that right now. But, you know, I wasn't like cool with her. I just knew her as a supervisor. I had seen that she was competent. And I am very reluctant to, because of my whole like introvert thing, right? I'm very reluctant to like put people on blast or recommend people. But I recommended her. I said, I know she can do the job. And I went and I said this to Dr. Bliss and she got hired. And once again, she was my boss. But had
not a good one. Not a good one.
Had I not chosen that moment of obedience to refer her, despite my feelings, despite what I thought I knew, despite what I thought I deserved, had I not done that and been humble in that way, despite me wanting to be, I don't think we would be where we are today. I don't think my career would be where it is today. I don't think I would have the spiritual growth and sort of everything else that came, the good and the bad that came along from that relationship. But just a little snippet of like how God takes things that don't look like they're going to add up, things that you think you deserve but you're not getting, and how he takes those and really transforms them and really makes them into something that you could never imagine, or even fathom for that case.
I think there's also a bit of that piece of that story missing, right? So firstly, we didn't like each other, but we learned very early that we worked well together. I think that we figured out that our careers kind of were dependent on each other. Where I lacked, you excelled, and where you lacked, I excelled. And then we were just out of a job. And during that time, I had no clue what you were doing. I know you had went off and got this job at this very large for-profit company, or making all this money now. And here I was unemployed as a supervisor. And then we didn't have the best friendship. There was no friendship, as a matter of fact, at the time. And you called me with this job. But during that time, I had been fasting and praying and saying, God, I have these two brand new small children. My children were under the age of two under two. And I'm without a job and I don't know what to do, God. And he said, don't fret. It's going to come directly to you. When you brought it to me, I knew it was God, because we ain't do each other like that. Had to be God, right? So I take this position and it ends up setting us up for the rest of our lives. I don't think either one of us could have seen then what we just needed to pay a bill, how that set us up for the rest of our lives. That particular position, what ended up happening is another opportunity did come up along the way. And because I was Lily's supervisor, I then recommended her for that position. So I was no longer her supervisor. She was now my equal. And once we were on equal ground, which was not long, I want to say maybe another year or so into that, as soon as you got licensed, we built from that point up. But at any given time, I could have hated on Lily. Lily could have hated on me. And we could have went our separate ways trying to make our own success. But we were keenly aware of how our success played and built off of one another. And so naturally, a relationship grew. From supervisor to supervisee, and into entrepreneurial ventures, into friendships, right? And into familial friendships. And so, but that was all ordained by God and not by ourselves. We knew what our gifts were. We didn't know how to use our gifts. And it was fully trusting and relying on God to be able to utilize that and to shame us, right? Because, you know, what we thought were our gifts weren't also. That was a learning process. But being able to be open and flexible to that, and understanding that my gift, I want to be very clear, my gift is dependent on my obedience to God and my relationship with Lily. My gift means nothing if Lily's discernment isn't helping to guide me and pray and protect over me as we do these ventures, right? So we fully are aware of how our gifts play off of one another, and not only how it supports us in business, but how it supports our families. I didn't even say this to you, Dr. Lily, yet. I'm going to put it out there. I got Sarai's Christmas gift in the mail, and I cried, right? So Lily tells me stop crying because now I've done healing work. I cry a lot, and I didn't cry for 10 years, so here it goes. And it was this book based on confidence that you specifically saw that my child needed in that moment, right? So it's these areas that maybe I oversee or I lack that are not my gift, that God has given me you as my partner, right? To fill those gaps with your gift. And so being aware of our gifts are not important for just ourselves, but for those around us too.
Yeah, and I think you've started a conversation about things that we're going to be talking about along the, this channel of like how God's gift impacts family relationship, how God puts people in your way that are going to help you flourish that gift and nurture that gift, how God takes people out of your life that are not in line with God's purpose for you. And so we're definitely going to be exploring these themes, and this is all, there's like, it's all intertwined and interlocked in such a way. And so we're going to be taking the thread out little by little, just kind of showing you guys the picture of all of this, but definitely very true. We had some sense of understanding of our gifts, but it was really the obedience. The obedience to God, and understanding that we can't do things on our own. That's why we live in families and communities and cities and countries, because we need others and we need support. And God plans that. God ordains that. God, if you give your life to God and you really submit to understanding him and spending time with him and just letting him sort of insert and consume your life, not in a crazy psychopathic way, like
A little.
normal ways, then you can definitely have that, and you can definitely enjoy those things and
And
benefit
essentially
from.
that's how you find out your God's expectations, right? Like by spending the time, by demonstrating obedience is really where he starts to show up and show us what he wants out of us, right? But without that relationship, how do we know?
Yep. So I implore you guys to continue to check us out, listen to our ramble, take from it what you can.
And go grab your totally unorthodox devotional planner. Link is going to be in the comment section, but follow along with us seriously. We implore you this week to really consider what your gifts are and what your natural skills are and how you can use that to reach your goals this year in 2020.